Okay, so we're moving to a new section of this book that we've been reading every week following the call, and this section is called Kingdom Devotion. And it's the part of the Sermon on the Mount that's devoted more to religious practices, so almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. Religiosity, which concentrates on public display, is a far cry from heartfelt devotion to God. And I just want to start this by reading this quote from Eberhard Arnold from his book Salt and Light, which if you've never heard of it, it's really worth reading. It's his reflections on the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is not a high-tension moralism. It is the revelation of God's real power in human life. If we take our surrender to God seriously and allow Him to enter our lives as light, as the only energy which makes new life possible, then we will be able to live the new life. And I think that's what this whole chapter is focused on, is this taking our surrender to God seriously and not living in front of other people. Mm-hmm. So, okay, Doreen, you should read the chapter. You should read the verse in question for today.
So the verse in question is Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, and then 16 through 18. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. That's just straight to the point. Mm-hmm. You're just gratifying yourself with making yourself feel good by
making yourself look good in front of others. And I think that's sort of the theme throughout all these. It's so hard for us to do good without wanting other people to acknowledge it.
Yeah, it's like validation just seems so necessary sometimes.
Yeah, and try as you might, you can do something good, fast, give alms, mm-hmm. and try as you might to want to just follow these teachings. There's such a temptation to let it slip, mm-hmm.
And maybe that's particularly true for people that are kind of steeped in religiosity or trying to practice it every day. I think for people that have just discovered Jesus in the Gospels, like maybe that's less of a temptation, but mm-hmm. definitely develops, and it's definitely a challenge.
So Jesus is actually assuming that we're going to do these things, right? That we're going to fast.
That's a good place to start.
Right. And that we're going to pray and that we're going to give alms. But he's very clear about how we are to do those things. Mm-hmm. He just assumes, as Sinclair Ferguson writes, he assumes that these disciplines are basic to any spiritual vitality. Mm-hmm. And he was no legalist. So he was not telling us we must fast, once a week or for 4 months leading up to Lent. But he assumed that in every Christian's life, if we want our relationship to God to be strong, we're going to have to, at times undertake some self-deprivation and exert some self-mastery mm-hmm. in regard to eating and drinking. But if we let other people know about it to make them think that we are pious people, Jesus said, this is not a gift in the sight of God. It is a purchase. The man is, so in this case, we're not fasting to please God. We're fasting to get a return, mm-hmm. Estimation in the eyes of our fellow men. How subtle our desire for reputation is.
Yeah, that's true.
Anything else stand out for you from these wonderful readings? This one from Abraham Joshua Heschel I thought was particularly good.
Yes. No, for me, what stood out was that it's really important to, maybe not necessarily overanalyze. And I think something that happens though too when you're trying to take on a hardship or to come closer to God, that can be very lonely humanly. So I think that's another aspect to it where you want other people to stand beside you and go through it with you, or to be seen as you're suffering. And that's not, to just realize that that is not important, and that to have the comfort and the confidence that God sees whatever you've taken on or are doing to draw closer to him.
Right. I mean, and sometimes you're not going to have a choice that people
Right.
will see. So, for example,
Right.
like we live in community, we eat our meals together.
Yeah.
If someone was fasting, it would be kind of obvious that they weren't partaking in the meal.
True.
So I don't think it's so much that you have to hide it as you need to be aware of the temptation
Yes.
that, takes any of the glory away from God or the longing. Abram Joshua Heschel writes here, to perform deeds of holiness is to absorb the holiness of deeds. We must learn how to be one with what we do. That's a really good way of thinking about it,
Yes.
I thought.
Yep.
And then he writes here at the end, what ultimately counts most is not the scope of one's deeds, but their impact upon the life of the soul. That's a really important thing, that, we're often tempted to grand acts, being, whether it's of fasting, prayer marathons,
Yeah. Long marches.
but when we do these deeds, which Jesus expects we will need to do if we want to maintain our spiritual connection to him, it's not the scope,
Yeah.
but it's the impact on the life of the soul. So for someone in their sickbed, a disabled person, someone who's struggling in their marriage or in work or anything, these good deeds have an impact on the soul if we do them in the right way.
Yeah, and then the last section too makes a really good point about how we can't have a double heart when we're taking on these actions or performing duties for Christ. And something that jumped out to me is a neglected heart is so confused and dark that the little grace which is in it is not ordinarily discernible. Most accurate and laborious Christians who take most pains and spend most time about their hearts do yet find it very difficult to discover the pure and genuine workings of the Spirit there. I think that points to just like what I was trying to say before, just a childlike approach to some of these things can be most helpful.
That was
Otherwise
from,
it is confusing.
Yeah, that was from John Flavel.
Yes.
And I'm just going to read this paragraph at the end because it probably speaks to most of us. How then shall the Christian who is comparatively negligent about heart work ever be able to discover it? Sincerity, which is the thing sought, lies in the heart, like a small piece of gold on the bottom of a river. He who would find it must stay till the water is clear, and then he will see it sparkling at the bottom. Then the heart may be clear and settled. How much pains and watching, care and diligence are required. So that's for all of us. Find the settled waters where we can see the gold of sincerity at the bottom, and then we'll be able to reach down and grab it.
Good stuff.
All right, we'll close it out for this time and talk to you next week.